Do as they say, not as they do, because the sins these televangelists committed were just about beyond forgivable. Back in the 70s and 80s, Jimmy Swaggart was one of the most influential evangelical preachers in America. He was producing shows nearly every day and broadcasting on hundreds of channels across the world. When he talked, the people in his community listened. When he exposed fellow TV preacher Marvin Gorman for having extramarital affairs, Gorman lost his job. But the rival preacher got his revenge, having Swaggart followed and photographed with a sex worker. The blackmail saw Gorman reinstated and Swaggart taken off the air for a while. Swaggart re-entered the spotlight with an infamous 1988 speech where he cried buckets of tears and asked for forgiveness.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
They seemed to be crocodile tears, though. Just 3 years later, he got caught again and lost everything. He later clawed his way back to head up his ministry and once again host a TV show. In June 2025, he had a heart attack and was in critical condition as of the making of this video. Since 1979, Kenneth Copeland has headlined the Believer's Voice of Victory, first a weekly, then a daily TV program syndicated to stations across the U.S. He's collected millions in donations. In 2018, Copeland purchased a very expensive Gulfstream 5 jet from entertainment mogul Tyler Perry, making his total number of luxury private planes 3. Copeland has repeatedly claimed the jets are a job requirement.
How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business.
In 2015, Copeland said in an interview with televangelist Jesse Duplantis that it was agitating his spirit when he'd get on a commercial plane and he'd be hit with numerous requests from strangers asking him to pray for them. Copeland said,
You can't manage that today.
Right.
This dope-filled world.
Right.
And get in a long tube with a bunch of demons.
Right.
Copeland doesn't just use his fleet of jets for work, though. He also reportedly uses them to ferry himself around his various vacation properties. Marcus Lamb founded the Daystar Television Network, the second largest Christian TV network on Earth. His story was a familiar one. He became a devout member of the church at a young age and started preaching as a teenager. His whole life was all about spreading the good word. But several of his employees threatened to spread some pretty bad news about him, leading Lamb into a corner. During a stunning sermon in 2010, Lamb admitted to having an affair a few years earlier. According to him, 3 women who had previously worked for him had threatened to go public if they weren't paid $7.5 million. With little other recourse, Lamb repented, asked his congregation for forgiveness, and went on the Dr. Phil show. His wife stuck with him even after he was sued for allegedly abusing employees during mandated quiet time. Author F. Scott Fitzgerald famously noted that there are no second acts in American lives, but he never encountered Jim Bakker. In 1973, Jim and his then-wife Tammy Faye Bakker co-founded the Trinity Broadcasting Network, home of their program, the PTL Club. PTL stood for Praise the Lord, of course. The Bakkers soon began construction on Heritage USA, a Christian theme park with water slides, a 500-room hotel, and big tax exemptions. An IRS investigation found that the Bakkers redirected $1.3 million to personal accounts. That didn't actually take him down, but CNN reports about an alleged hush money payment of $279,000 to cover up the sexual assault of his secretary sent him tumbling. In 1989, Bakker was convicted on 29 counts, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Bakker only served a few of those years, though, getting parole in 1994. It wasn't long before he was back on TV. He's been hosting The Jim Bakker Show since 2003. In June 2021, he settled a lawsuit with the state of Missouri over his claims that colloidal silver could cure COVID-19. Pat Robertson helped invent televangelism. In 1960, he created America's first Christian TV outlet, which evolved into the Christian Broadcasting Network. Robertson hosted that channel's flagship religious program, the 700 Club, for decades, using its proceeds to start a university and his notoriety to even run for president in 1988. With the 700 Club as his pulpit, Robertson made many controversial remarks over the years. Among the things that Robertson said were possessed by demons or invited demonic spirits into one's homes were images of Buddha, sleepover seances, yoga, horoscopes, adopting children from overseas, psychics, and the Twilight books. He also claimed that Democrats, encouraged by gay people, wanted to put Christians in concentration camps. He argued that a stroke suffered by Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, was a literal act of God. In his 1991 book, The New World Order, he claimed that the United States was run by a number of secret organizations tied to Satan, including Jewish banking families. In 2012, Liberian President Charles Taylor was convicted on numerous war crimes, including terrorism and forcing children to be soldiers. During Taylor's trial, Robertson urged the U.S. government to support Taylor, with whom he had a deal to mine for gold. Joel Osteen Ministries broadcasts weekly services from Lakewood Church in Houston on 56 broadcast stations as well as multiple cable channels. Osteen is the author of 7 best-selling books and hosts a satellite radio show, all of which drives traffic to his 16,000-plus seat megachurch, a converted sports arena. Osteen's specific version of prosperity gospel has made him especially prosperous, with a net worth reported to be around $50 million.
I don't think God has any problem with you being blessed.
In 2017, Osteen was widely criticized for what many saw as him turning his back on his community. As Hurricane Harvey bombarded the Houston area with heavy rains and flooding that put the lives of many locals in jeopardy, Osteen didn't open the massive Lakewood church property as a safe haven, shelter, or refugee center. The church announced on its social media accounts that the facility was uninhabitable because of flooding, but photographs posted by locals suggested that wasn't exactly true. After being called out, Osteen opened up the church for flood relief and set up a donation center. After starting the Orlando Christian Center megachurch in 1983 and holding faith healing services there, Minister Benny Hinn took what he dubbed his miracle healing services on the road. By 1990, he debuted This Is Your Day, a daily TV show on the Trinity Broadcasting Network, where it aired for years. In 2005, Christian watchdog organization Ministry Watch issued a donor alert, urging against giving money to Hinn's ministries. The reasons, according to the organization, were that Hinn lived a lavish lifestyle with funds intended for charitable purposes and had self-serving prosperity theology messages. The alert also said Hinn lacked any oversight on his spending. 2 years later, the federal government looked into Hinn's finances. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley launched an investigation into the financial makeup of megachurches, searching for signs of exploitation of the institution's tax-exempt status. Hinn, by that time headed the World Healing Center Church and Benny Hinn Ministries, was among those investigated, though he at first refused to participate. In 2011, he was cleared of wrongdoing. In May 2018, televangelist Jesse Duplantis put out a call to action. His old jet, one of 3, was wearing out, and he just knew his followers would help him. He just needed a few $1 million to buy a humble new Falcon 7X passenger jet. According to Duplantis, God personally told him that he wants him flying in that particular plane, presumably because the good Lord would never expect his closest followers to fly Southwest.
As I was going home, the Lord, real quickly, he said, "Jesse, do you like your plane?"
In the aforementioned conversation with Kenneth Copeland, Duplantis said that he was told directly by God that being satisfied with the plane he had would be letting his faith stagnate, so he had to get a new one. If you've ever wondered why American politics and evangelicalism have become so intertwined over the past few decades, look no further than Jerry Falwell. In the 1970s, he founded the Moral Majority Political Action Committee shortly after an all-white Christian academy that he founded was threatened with losing its tax-exempt status because of school desegregation laws. You could argue that Falwell also helped start the culture wars. He sued Hustler magazine for $45 million because they ran a parody piece making fun of him, and he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. He lost. He stated that a gay-friendly church was a satanic cult and that its inevitable annihilation would cause a celebration in heaven. Falwell likewise said the September 11th attacks happened because God was angry at America's acceptance of, among others, the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians. He called the attacks
probably what we deserve.
He even accused the purple Teletubby of being gay. Ted Haggard served for 3 years as the president of the National Association of Evangelicals. He seemed to have everything, including a loving wife and 5 adoring children. But then he got caught having meth-fueled hookups with a male sex worker, causing everything to come tumbling down. It was the escort himself who told the press about Haggard's dalliances. Haggard's responses to the accusations varied over the next few months, running the gamut from total denial to, finally, complete admission. Haggard wound up disgraced and ejected from his church. He was poised for a comeback in 2009 when HBO produced a documentary on his return to the righteous path, but more allegations popped up. In 2012, he was on an episode of Celebrity Wife Swap, where he switched spouses with actor Gary Busey. Married couple Tony and Susan Alamo started a small ministry just outside Hollywood in 1969. By the mid-70s, they were broadcasting their gospel and living in a 14,000-square-foot mansion in Arkansas on a compound staffed by their followers. They were paid $5 a week and given food, when they behaved. Investigators discovered that followers also worked in a sweatshop, producing high-end denim jackets that the Alamos sold for hundreds of dollars. When Susan died in 1982, Tony had her body on display for 6 months, with his congregants performing a constant vigil over it so she would come back to life. The government started taking action in the early 90s, and Tony found himself on the wrong side of the law. He'd been operating his businesses as tax-free nonprofits, which the IRS shut down. He stole his wife's body from the compound after it was shut down. Tony was eventually convicted on 10 counts of transporting minors across state lines. He died in prison. Fans of Robert Tilton know him as the host of Success in Life. Early frequenters of YouTube know him as the farting preacher. Pretty much everyone else knows him as a huge fraud. Tilton's message was clear from the start. Poverty is the result of sin, and you could avoid it by sending money.
And you need to make a vow of faith of $1,000. Oh, Bob, couldn't you say 25? No!
His ministry became so popular that he attracted between 8,000 and 10,000 worshipers to his megachurch every week, and his broadcasts brought in scores of letters with personal requests for prayer along with donations. During an undercover investigation, ABC discovered that prayer letters sent to Tilton's television ministry were sent straight to the bank, where their donations were marked and their prayers were thrown in the trash. Tilton denied all that, saying he prayed so hard over the letters that the ink leaked into his bloodstream. He claimed that was why he needed plastic surgery paid for by all those donations. With his grinning California charm and charismatic preaching, Peter Popoff was the man to see in the 80s for revival services and lightning-fast faith healing. Attendees of his sermons were amazed when he'd call out strangers by name, knowing exactly what afflicted them through the divine providence of God. Of course, it was all clever trickery.
Popoff's wife, Elizabeth, had previously gotten personal information from people in the audience and then fed it to her husband electronically.
Prestigious debunker James Randi exposed the ruse on national television. And yet, that wasn't the end of Popoff. He kept right on going and started making infomercials selling his patented Miracle Manna and Miracle Spring Water. Popoff claims they're guaranteed cures for basically everything. Mike Warnke was a pretty big deal back in the day. He lived a good life as a minister and Christian comedian, traveling the world spreading his message that the devil is coming for you and you better be ready to fight him. How did he know? Because he falsely claimed he used to be a satanic preacher with a cult that made blood sacrifices. Among his other supposed accomplishments were his doctorate in philosophy, his 2 bachelor's degrees, and a varying number of wounds he suffered in Vietnam, absolutely none of which was true. What makes Warnke's case all the more fascinating is that he was actually outed as a fraud by a Christian publication, Cornerstone Magazine, in an expose in 1991. As is often the case, the response was split. Some were angry at Warnke for his deception, others were upset at the magazine for calling out a man who was bringing the word of God to the people. A Christian Post piece from late 2019 outlined some of Ernest Angley's financial struggles. His Boeing 747 jet had reportedly been on blocks for 2 years, since Angley couldn't afford the 6-figure repairs that it needed. A lot of that had to do with the minister's various legal troubles and fall from grace. According to Forbes, one man who began working for Angley at 18 claimed that he would regularly be called to the preacher's house for special anointings that were essentially abuse sessions. Angley has previously been accused of operating a cult where followers were taught that enough prayer could heal HIV. Though Angley vehemently preached that homosexuality was a sin, he also reportedly closely inspected the privates of male parishioners after encouraging them to get vasectomies. Paul and Jan Crouch started a media empire, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, by buying up television stations across the country. The Los Angeles Times noted that more than 40 years later, their media empire has an estimated value of $750 million. The couple's granddaughter, Brittany Copper, has raised allegations that Paul and Jan have essentially used the network as their personal bank account. Copper says the couple has done everything in their power to avoid paying taxes, including having their chauffeurs ordained as ministers. Copper, who once served as the network's finance director, told the New York Times her job was, quote, to find ways to label extravagant personal spending as ministry expenses. It's worth noting that Copper may have had an axe to grind, given that she was fired, but she's not the only one to raise allegations either. In 2012, another of the Crouch's granddaughters sued, claiming that she had been sexually assaulted by a TBN employee when she was 13. She alleged that Jan had turned a blind eye and blamed her for the attack. Oral Roberts' career as a public preacher began in 1947 with revival-style tent services where he purportedly healed followers. Taking his talents to TV in 1954, he'd eventually become the top-grossing televangelist by the 1980s, promising viewers that they'd get wealthy if they sent him offerings. His $500 million Oral Roberts University complex, which includes a university, hospital, and medical school, opened in 1965 and still stands in Oklahoma. In the late 1980s, Roberts reported that his relationship with a higher power was in significant jeopardy, and that his viewers needed to help him get out of a high-stakes situation. In his Easter message in 1989, Roberts claimed that God told him he needed to come up with $8 million in sacred donations by the close of the year. If not, Roberts said, God would kill him.
I knew what sickness was. And I knew what healing was because I'd been healed.
In January 1987, Roberts repeated the tactic, announcing on his television show that God would end his life if he didn't get that $8 million in by March 30th. By the deadline, Roberts' adherents had sent him more than enough money to evidently save his life. He didn't die until 2009. Harold Camping co-created Family Radio in 1958, broadcasting religious music and fielding listeners' Bible questions on the air. Family Radio grew into a network of radio stations and cable TV projects, and Camping became publicly concerned with end times prophecy. He claimed that close biblical analysis revealed the date of the rapture, and that the world as we know it would end on either September 4, 1994, September 6, 1994, or May 21, 2011. By the time Camping died in 2013, he'd incorrectly predicted Armageddon about 13 times, and in the run-up to each date, he collected tens of millions of dollars from his most staunch supporters. Many of Camping's followers handed over their entire estates and emptied their bank accounts to help him spread the news. An ex-employee told Vice, "There were a lot of people who sold their houses, who gave up their life savings, and Harold thought it was funny. He would come into my office and say, 'So-and-so called me. They're broke, but I'm not giving their money back.'" Todd Bentley devoted his life to religion at the age of 18, following a drug overdose and an assault conviction. Claiming to be a faith healer, Bentley became a preacher and took over the Canada-based Fresh Fire ministry. By 2008, he was speaking at megachurches, performing faith healing rituals, and appearing on the God TV Christian Broadcasting Network. In July 2008, Nightline ran a story debunking Bentley's faith healing powers. That same year, Bentley split from his wife following an emotional affair with one of his employees. Bentley continued to preach until Minister Stephen Powell levied some serious allegations against him in 2019. Powell wrote on Facebook that Bentley was a sex addict who engaged in numerous affairs with both men and women, including interns and students under his leadership. Following a thorough investigation, a ministerial oversight board discredited Bentley, stating that there were credible accusations of a steady pattern of ungodly and immoral behavior. Father John Corapi hosted multiple primetime talk shows and documentaries bearing his name on the Eternal Word television network. A member of the religious order, the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity, Corapi also published well-received books, released religious DVDs and albums, and spoke out about faith from a Catholic perspective. After receiving a letter from an unidentified woman who was known to have been close with Father Corapi, the priest's order launched an investigation in 2011 into allegations that he behaved inappropriately on numerous occasions. After poring through Corapi's emails and interviewing individuals involved, the order determined that the priest was living with a woman with whom he was also in a romantic relationship. They'd met during her tenure as a sex worker. Corapi had also apparently overused drugs and alcohol, exchanged explicit texts with another woman, and owned over $1 million worth of real estate, cars, and sports vehicles.
For so many of us who knew Father Corapi, this is both a shock and a puzzlement.
Catholic priests take sacred vows of chastity, celibacy, and poverty, and they're also expected to avoid activities deemed outwardly sinful, like recreational drug use. The order banned Corapi from any and all further priestly activities. One of the most prolific evangelists in the world, Joyce Meyer has written 150 books, while also operating numerous humanitarian programs and appearing daily on Enjoying Everyday Life. The syndicated Televangelism program is broadcast in more than 100 languages every day of the year, and it dates back to 1993. Meyer's reputation is fairly clean, although she was associated with a horrific series of crimes in 2009. Her personal bodyguard, Christopher Coleman, was carrying on an extramarital affair and wanted to be with his mistress, so he killed his spouse and their 2 young sons. He then sent phony death threats to his company email address to plant the idea that his family was killed as an act of hostility against Meyer and her operations. Coleman was convicted in the killing and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The family of Coleman's wife filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Joyce Meyer Ministries, alleging that it didn't do enough to stop Coleman from committing his crimes. The case was thrown out of court.